Hello there. I thought I would record a meandering video of about essentially this game, Napoleon and the Archduke Charles, the Battle of Abensberg. There's Charles himself. It's in Strategy and Tactics, number 113. And before I go any further, I must say that this video is, and I aim to make my next few videos a tribute to the generosity of a fellow who proposed a trade on Board Game Geek with me, and I had to decline the trade because the game he wanted, or the main game he wanted, I don't have it in this country. It's in storage in England, and I can't get to it so quickly. So he proposed me another trade, which I also declined because I didn't fancy that one. And then he promptly sent me a whole bunch of games on my wants list. So one is this. 3 Strategy and Tactics. Next one is the Horse Soldiers. The third one is Africa Orientale. The magazine's in here, but in another room I can't reach at the moment. My family's asleep. And then a boxed game, Rommel and Tunisia. Last Chance for Glory. So fantastic generosity. He claimed he wasn't being generous because it was these are from the estate of a friend of his, and he didn't want to have the bother of selling all of it off. But so that said, I feel I kind of like owe it to the community to give something back on these at least. So I'll be doing videos on all of these games. Should be very interesting. This is the Great Battles of the American Civil War series, but it's kind of heavily modified for cavalry actions. And the first video I ever put, the thing that started my whole channel off, was a Great Battles of the American Civil War game called the name's just flown out of my mind. Anyway, one of those lovely games that I really loved. I loved that series. And it was an unusual version of it, based on Baton Rouge. That's it, on a city, attack on a city or a town. And this again is a kind of modification system based on cavalry, so that will be interesting. Africa Orientale is essentially the Europa system that was borrowed into this magazine game with a few sort of special modifications. And then this is the game, the same scale, exactly like time and space wise as the campaign for North Africa. Monstrous pasta driven study of the African campaign, but this is a different system, yet still focusing on logistics and command as well as movement and combat. So that will be very interesting to have a look at. And then this is from a series by Keith Poulter, who at this point was the owner and editor of Strategy and Tactics. It's a very interesting system. I covered in a couple of shortish videos the Battle of Austerlitz in the same series, and so I'm really happy to get this one out. And what we basically have is it's from the 1809 campaign. So the Austrians have moved against France and Napoleon, and then but they're sort of too slow getting going, giving Napoleon seizes the initiative and launches an attack against them. Essentially what we have in this game is the French start manning the line of, I think this is the river Abens here, and where is Abensberg itself? Somewhere around here. I thought it was up there. Maybe it's off map, I'm not sure. But anyway, the point being that the French start up here, some forces here, and then off map further up here, and there's another game in the series you can connect to this with the Battle of Eckmühl. but further up north that direction is the Danube, and so you sort of have France and so forth this way, and the German states are precariously allied, and all that way along is Vienna, and so there's a kind of like a dog leg in the elbow of that configuration. Napoleon launches this attack to break through the Austrian line, and then his attempt was to sort of squash them up against the Danube there. So this game is to do with that breakout and the initial portions of the battle. So, and essentially what you have then is, so you have the German line, sorry, the French line starts here, the Austrian line starts here, and the French begin with a corps, Lannes Corps, which bursts through. These have to stay immobile for 2 turns, the same as the Austrians facing them. The Austrians start bringing in some reinforcements this way, and then they have a few here towards the beginning. It's a 19-turn game. We've reached I've completed turn 11 at this point, so you can see it's just over halfway through, and the French must break the line here so that the Austrians fall back and create a second position here. If they can stand along this marshy barrier, then they're deemed to have won the game. So the French have to break through the marshy barrier. And to sort of note that, they have to capture one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, and here or this. So these villages here, that bundle, or that bundle, or that bundle, or that bundle, or that bundle. One of them, if they hold that game end or the last to pass through, and they have inflicted 50% more losses on the Austrians than they themselves have taken, they have won the game. And you can see at this point they've broken over the marsh. This is very important because it's a very strong position, because attacking from the marsh gives you the sort of strongest detriment to your combat attack. So by managing to hold on the marsh line, the Austrians would have a great benefit. Once the French, I keep trying to call them the Germans, I've been playing too many Second World War games with the Germans on the offensive. The French, if they break through, it's going to be a lot harder for the Austrians to hold them. And once they've gained one of these kind of like, sort of a bridgehead, and again these the villages are also equally as strong as the marshes, although obviously they're more points rather than whole lines. So if they hold one of those, they're pretty much over the marsh in enough force that the Austrians would be forced again to fall back again. So and I don't know if there's significantly more Austrian forces down here that would be enveloped, but ones above would essentially there'd be more Austrians up here, so the French would be sort of far enough to be able to flank and envelop them. So that is the game. That is the objectives. The Austrians are just trying to stop the French doing that, so essentially they have to keep them out of one of these by game end. You can see it's sort of turning to the French at the moment, because they've got a hefty force there. They're not in here or here, but they're obviously heading for this, and then they would just have to hold it. They've got another hefty force here that they can sort of back up. So I think essentially the French have it in the bag. So that's the situation. Let me talk a little bit about the game itself. You can see here you have the whole map. And I'll speak a little bit how it plays, and then we'll talk about the components and so forth. So the game and the excitement in this game is depends on sort of 2 or 3 things. The one is the fact that you have this very hilly, restricted terrain. So you have woods and rough terrain. It's essentially hills and high terrain, and sometimes they are combined. So here you've just got woods, here you've got woods and rough. They're just rough, and so movement is very difficult through them. And units, as they move through these, they have to roll for disruption. So if you move through rough, woods rough, marsh or woods, unless you are on a trail, the chance of getting disruption either a 1 or a 1 or a 2 on a d6, depending. French are a bit better at it than the Austrians, but they can still get disrupted. When you're disrupted, you're flipped, and you have like half movement. You can defend, but you can't attack, can't enter zones of control, so you're very ineffective. And it's quite easy to rally again in your turn, provided you have a significant strength left, but it obviously delays a lot. So because of that, and because all the units more or less start here, the road net or the trail net, let's say, because the only roads are these those orangey ones, and I'll talk about those in a minute. It goes up here, so there's one here, and then there's one here that joins there. The rest are all trails, so it's slower movement, only 1 movement point each, and units have 5 movement points, or 7 or 8 if they're cavalry. So and it goes down to 2 movement points here, or 3 if you enter any marsh. So you can see it's very slow moving through here unless you're on a trail. So these are vitally important, and the Austrians have to find a way, good trails to get back so they can form their second line of defence, and the French are obviously trying to find ways to manoeuvre around that and get around behind and surround and get to over this second marsh line before the Austrians can do so well. So that's a major part of the game. It's a more game of manoeuvre. This is kind of like grand tactical, semi-operational. Each unit is I believe it's a brigade, so 2 or 3 counties. Yes, 2 or 3 counties are a division, and about 5 or 6, 7 or 8 are a corps, depending on the size of it and what formations were part of it. So and it's particularly about manoeuvre because you're trying to get here before the other, and combat is attritional, so it's not bang, counter's gone or remains. You take losses and fall back, take losses and fall back, so you don't just evaporate quickly. It's more pursuit and attrite. So manoeuvre is essential, and manoeuvre is difficult because of the net of trails is quite rich. You can see they are everywhere, but they still funnel you along certain routes, like here, and sort of here. So that is very important. And the second thing that is very important is the command and control. And essentially, the way that works is on the French side they have Napoleon, and within 8 hexes he can automatically have one of his corps leaders. There's Lefebvre, and here there is, what's his name, Van Damme, and then up here his 3rd corps is Lannes. His 3rd corps leader there is Lannes. I'll quickly show you the chain of command. So Napoleon, see, he has these 3 corps and their associated divisions. And the Austrians are a little bit different. You have Louis, so although Charles is the brains, Louis is actually in charge. And he's not that great leader, so he only has a range of 5, and then he has Hoheit, Keinmeier, and underneath him, which is this red fellow here and blue fellow here, and then he also has Hiller and Hohenzollern-Hechingen, who are independent. Hohenzollern-Hechingen is there and Hiller is here, and so he can put two of his directly in command. The other ones have to roll, and they have to roll on this number here on the left on a d6 to put themselves in command. So he's a 1. He's a 1, so you can see only a sixth of the time do they get in command. If units are out of command, they have half movement and cannot enter zones of control. You can go out of them, but you can't attack. Not so bad for the Austrians, but you can see that these guys often there, the divisions underneath them are just moving at half speed. Now he's under under this corps leader, so if he's not actually in command from him, he can try and roll. So he's got a 2 rating, so he could try and get independent command. The point is if he gets in command, he could command, say, all of his divisions, well, those 2 or 3, within his range. Otherwise they have to roll separately, but still you can see it's only a third of the time the Austrian division leaders are going to put themselves in command if their commander can't. So they have that restriction, and you know, you start spread out, so you have to concentrate to try and get your fellows together within, because he's the top leader's always in command. So if he can put his subordinates in command, they can put their subordinates in command, you're good to go. The French start out. Lannes is get too far away from Napoleon. He's doing the main attack, but he has a rating of 5, and so 1 to 5 on a d6, he's going to put himself in command. So his guys are pretty much good to go. And then when he sends out detachments, like since police here, cavalry, 50% of the time he puts himself in command. So the French have that advantage. But they're not, you know, you can't do everything all at once. So, you know, I had the French moving out here, they were sort of moving around undefended southern edge, but it meant that those units put themselves out of command, so they couldn't actually attack, they could only try and funnel. And so we got some strong units left here that were not able to be sort of put in danger, but they themselves were cut off. So there's kind of dancing around, neither of them able, except occasionally when he got himself into command, or he did, to attack. So you have the network of the terrain, and the fact that if you aren't moving along a trail, you're risking disruption. If you are moving along a trail, you're kind of funneled, and also there's defensive fire, and if you move along a trail into zone of control, your opponent gets to fire at you as though you're in clear terrain, even though you might be moving through heavily wooded areas. So you can see you're using the trail network for movement, but it makes you more vulnerable to attack, and that combined with the command control makes for a very interesting game of manoeuvre. And the excitement is in, you know, can we get our body, do we get in the command control we need, do I get the role I need, or do I put him out of command so I can get him in command next turn, and perform that manoeuvre before my enemy does it. So that, and with the Austrian reinforcements coming on here and here, you can see they don't come on back here, so even the reinforcements have to move back. Do you send them forwards, you know, to defend forwards, or do you send them back and have a lightly, which is essentially what I did. I sent the reinforcements back straight away, so it was quite, the Austrians didn't have such strong forward defence, which meant the French got forward quite quickly, etc, etc. There's also a point here, there's a village at this point. You can see kind of more, it's a focal point in the initial stages before we get to here, and if the Austrians can hold that by the 9th turn, they get 10 extra victory points, which is worth 10 strength points against what the French have to get that 50% over and above to and alongside with the terrain condition, the geographical objective to win the game. So that gives you an incentive not just to rush straight back, gives the French some incentive, something to defend before they get to here, which adds again to the excitement and the choices of what you're going to do. So that's the game, and it's a very exciting situation, and I really have enjoyed playing it so far. Now, to speak to the components and the system itself, you can see probably that I have colorized and used black permanent marker to outline certain parts of the map. This I found was extremely necessary because I can show you maybe over here. You can see this is the trails as they were represented as given, and it's quite hard, especially from a distance, to see. You can also see here they're thin white outlined trails, especially in like a region like this. It was very hard at a glance to see them. You had to really move up close and go, oh yeah, there's a trail there. I needed them to sort of jump out at me, so I went over them with a coloured pencil, just a brown one, and it just made them harder lines, easier to see. And the same with the rows. The rows are important because you can move twice as fast. Again, that was just a thicker, you can see the remains of there, a white line. I used a pretty bad pen that I just had handy, an orange one, but it just made it jump out a bit more. And again, I needed that to help me because the road network is so important. I really needed to be able to see it well, so it needed, there's a lot of them, so I did the whole map except for here. I didn't think you were going to get down to that. It's not, essentially once the French have one of these, that's what the game's all about. So the Austrians will be taking them back. I don't really know what this part is for, except maybe with the sister game, when you combine the two, there's more potential for different victory conditions perhaps. And I don't know, maybe some reinforcements coming here, because these counters here never enter this game. They're only if you pair it with its twin, so maybe some Austrians come on here, I don't know. But anyway, so another thing I needed was the villages. Now originally these, unfortunately I've coloured them all in blue, but originally these were just boxes with faint blue lines, those diagonal lines on it. You could kind of see them, but in places like this where they're in a marsh and they're very small, it was really difficult to see, and some of them were lost in the midst of woods. And so initially I just coloured them in this blue to try and keep, because they had blue lines in it, to try and keep with the tone of the overall map, not to make it too glaring. But even then, you can, like there's a village there, you would never know it's covered up. Oh yeah, and these, because these are victory objective ones, I made them yellowish so they would stand out more. Again, you would never know, and they're very important because these are choke points, because you get a very good defensive modifier, good points to defend in these villages. And so because the trail network is so important, you want to find these choke points, places where to defend, and know in advance if you're going into attack. So again, I went around every single one to highlight the outside of the hex, so even though you can't see the village, you know that hex is a village hex. So again, the choke points and the trails and the roads were really necessary to highlight, so I modified the map that much. And then again, you can also see these are photocopies from the rules. You only need these two sheets, so you've got fire combat, melee combat, and the terrain effects chart. But as usual, I highlight. This is just to make it easy. You can see that's the 1-to-1, and that's a 7 on 2d6. So otherwise, without those, you roll 5, and you're just going, okay, so I want 3 to, where is 5? I can't remember. If you know that that's 7, it's easy to locate it more quickly. And then this is things like on all of these results you have a morale check, and you couldn't tell. You just have to remember that unless you have these little reminders, so blah blah blah. I always add that. That's fine. You also have the roster sheets, because this has a strength of 12 and this is its morale rating, so as it loses strength, the morale goes down. You get horse artillery, which are only 2, 3 or 4. Well, that's a lot of horse artillery there. So there you can see the attritional nature of the combat. You generally are losing 1 or 2 at most. It's very rare you're going to get down to there. So you get those for both the French and the Austrians. You also get some are heavy cavalry, some are green troops, so they're not so great in melee and so forth. And the turn track, 35 minutes a turn. Then you get the rules, which come in the magazine. They come in the centre. I take them out and sew them together so that I have a separate rule booklet, because I really don't like having to heft the weight of a magazine. You can see every time I'm looking through the rules, and sometimes flipping through the magazine page. It's also, all the tables are in the centre there. I just blue tack those pages together so I can unblue tack them later, but it's just, I don't want to be flipping through the tables when I need to get to a rules section. The rules aren't massively long. The last page is just sort of a variant. You've got skirmishers here, setup. There's only 2 scenarios, essentially historical and non-historical one. Only a very small variation between those. And you've got morale, leaders, command, control on those 2 pages. Disruption, melee, fire combat, movement, and that's it. And it's not complicated, but there's a lot in it, because you have facing is important, stacking is 2 per hex. Moving through, stacking is in effect during movement. If you move, you can move through, but you might disrupt. Then you have lots of subtleties, like artillery can fire 5 hexes. That doesn't happen often in this terrain. Cavalry retreat before combat. You have defensive fire, then offensive fire. A turn is essentially rally, move, combat, starting with defensive fire, then offensive fire, and then you can move into melee. And also that is a function of command, in that each commander, according to his range, so it's upside down, I know, but that 5 means his activation roll if he's out of command on a 1 to 5, but also he can command 5 subordinates and or units, and 5 of them can be put into zones of control and combat. So for example, this fellow, he could put 3 of his units into enemy zones of control and melee combat per turn, but no more. So you can't just willy-nilly go into attack. It depends on which units are in command and how many your commander can manage at once. And you have modifiers like enfilade, ammunition depletion. That only happens if you're surrounded. Flanks, attacks, cavalry, retreat before combat, and so forth. You can do forced march, risk disruption. Rallying's very simple, just 1 die roll, no modifiers except for a leader modifier. And then leaders being caught in combat, and the skirmishers are very important because it enables you only have 3 as the Austrians maximum, and I should have some out now, but I've neglected. You just release a strength point and you put them down. Essentially they're kind of like mini roadblocks, but only up to a point, because also there is what do you call it? Overrun. So if you have if you're 25 to 1, and you can amass quite easily with 2 brigades and maybe a cavalry 25 strength points, you don't actually eliminate them, but other units can move through them, and you would have to fight them and eliminate them in combat later, or else they do get to move, but that they can be sort of run around. So enough wrinkles to create a very interesting system, but simple enough that it's not difficult to run it, based really just on the charts as you play the game. So I have to say, yes, it's very enjoyable. It moves fairly slowly, not because it's simple to do the movements. It's very quick. There's not too many pieces that it takes a long time to play out a turn. The turns move quite quickly, but because of the attritional nature, combat happens again and again and again, and every time you do it, you generally have 3 steps: the defensive fire, the offensive fire, and then probably, but not always, some melee combat as well. The melee combat only ever results in, at worst, routes, which is a sort of retreat and 2, 3 or 4 hexes and disrupt. But with pursuit you take losses from that, so you can wipe units out quite quickly, but generally they last a long time, so that it's moving back fairly slowly, trying to retain your forces and stop the French from getting to those villages. So with that in mind, if you like, it's not a quick sort of whiz-bang system, but it's a fast-playing, sort of slow-moving, if you like, system. And a very interesting situation, and I think really well implemented in terms of finding those trails, getting around or through the choke points, risking disruptions and moving overland, and then figuring out the command control, the excitement of finding a leader is or isn't out of command control on his own initiative, trying to get round behind the enemy or get in front of the enemy and holding your line behind.